The room froze before I even lifted my head. A chair scraped, a utensil hit the floor, and then my grandfather's voice cut through everything. You've been collecting disability checks for years. Every face swung toward me. Heat crawled up my neck. The air thickened, and the kind of silence that isn't asking for an answer, only a reaction, settled over the table. I managed a single breath before whispering, "What are you talking about?" That's when I noticed the man standing behind him, clutching a closed folder. My parents refused to meet my eyes. Before anyone said another word, the man cracked the folder open. I was raised in a home where silence moved faster than honesty. My parents, Linda and Mark, liked life tidy, predictable, and under control. I learned young that the easiest way to keep the peace was to shrink myself. Smaller, quieter, easier to overlook. My younger sister, Emma, never needed to learn that lesson. She lit up every room she walked into. If she asked for something, it appeared. If she stumbled, someone caught her before she touched the ground. Dad always said, "She just needs a little more support." Support was the one thing I never apparently qualified for. The first time I felt the imbalance in my bones, I was 12. I stood in the kitchen holding a field trip form. The fee was $35. Mom didn't look up from the stack of bills. "We can't afford extras this month." Minutes later, Emma burst in waving a flyer for dance classes. Mom's face softened instantly. "Of course, sweetheart. Same week, same bills, different rules." High school didn't fix the pattern. It cemented it. When Emma's laptop cracked, Dad ordered her a replacement that day. When mine died, he told me to use the library. Emma got private tutors. I got told to try harder. That was our house. 2 kids, 2 worlds, one truth nobody ever said out loud. Then came the injury. A slip on wet tile during my part-time shift. My back never fully bounced back. I moved slower, lifted cautiously, saved every receipt for medication because I never knew when I'd have to stretch a bottle. I showed Mom my first prescription, hoping she'd be worried. She just sighed. "You've got to toughen up, Iris. Don't lean on anyone." That line became a rule stitched into everything I did. College only widened the divide. Emma attended a private university across town, and Mom bragged about it for months. I went to community college and worked nights stacking boxes. When my textbooks cost too much, I dropped a class. When Emma's electives didn't fit her schedule, they hired someone to help her reorganize everything. But the memory that stayed with me happened in our kitchen. I'd just come home from work. A sharp throb in my back felt like someone had wedged a knife between my ribs. I set a crumpled prescription beside a bottle with 2 pills left. Mom was seasoning chicken, her back turned. "Can you help me cover this?" I asked. She didn't even pause. "You're stronger than this, Iris. Don't be dramatic." The kitchen gleamed with brand new appliances they'd bought that spring, stainless steel untouched by struggle. I stood under the dim overhead light, holding a bottle that rattled empty. That was when I understood. Effort didn't matter. Pain didn't matter. Need didn't matter. Only the family hierarchy did. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just nodded and slipped the bottle back into my bag. That was the day I finally understood my place in this family. Now, sitting at the dinner table again, the room felt smaller than it ever had. The lighting was warm, but nothing about the moment carried warmth. My parents, Linda and Mark, sat in their usual places, angled toward the relatives they valued most. Emma leaned close to Mom, whispering something that made them both smile. I watched the slope of their shoulders, the rhythm of their breathing. It was a kind of ease I had never been invited to share. Grandpa sat across from me, the only one in the room who didn't pretend this evening was ordinary. His jaw was tight, and his eyes kept drifting over my face as if hunting for something. Proof, perhaps, of a truth he hoped didn't exist. The man behind him, clutching a closed folder, hadn't been introduced. Still, I could tell he wasn't family. His posture was rigid, his presence sharply official. Later, I would find out he was an auditor Grandpa hired. At that moment, though, he was just another weight pressing on my chest. Dinner carried on. Small talk. Compliments about the food. Emma chatting about her upcoming vacation. My parents nodding as if they had orchestrated her entire life. I kept my hands clasped in my lap, fingers laced tightly to hold myself steady. Grandpa hadn't touched his fork. He waited. Then he repeated the same words he'd thrown at me earlier. You've been collecting disability payments for years. He didn't yell. He spoke with a calmness that made each word hit harder. The table fell silent. A cousin glanced at me, confused. Emma frowned, like my interruption had ruined her evening. Something sank inside me. Not fear, not anger, but something heavier. The slow, crushing realization that everyone here knew more about my life than I did. My throat tightened. I whispered what felt like the only possible response. What do you mean? Mom's fingers froze on her napkin. Dad stared at his plate, as if he could vanish into its reflection. No one spoke. Not a single person. The man with the folder stepped forward. And for the first time all night, I understood this wasn't a mistake. I excused myself before anyone could say another word. No one stopped me. That was the oddest part. You'd think a daughter walking away from a table full of family after being accused of receiving benefits she'd never touched would spark at least one outcry. But nothing followed me except the soft hum of conversation, resuming as if everyone hoped the moment hadn't occurred. The hallway beyond the dining room was narrow and dim. A framed photo of my parents and Emma hung by the door, perfectly lit by a small lamp. I wasn't in the picture. I paused before it, letting the cool air brush my skin. My heart wasn't racing. It was slow, steady, like it had finally stopped jumping at this family. I reached for the strap of my canvas bag, the one I carried every day. Inside were neatly folded receipts for copays, a prescription bottle with 2 pills left, and a small notebook tracking my medical expenses. I used to think these details were proof of responsibility. Now they felt like evidence. Evidence of a life constructed without the support I was accused of receiving. I slipped into the bathroom across the hall. The mirror caught the soft fuzz of the overhead light. I pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of my nose, my usual gesture as something heavier than anger settled into my chest. My reflection looked calm. Too calm, like someone waiting for instructions. I sat on the closed toilet lid and flipped open my notebook. Every page was crowded with dates, figures, cheap ink soaking into cheaper paper. Rent, meds, groceries, bus fare, clinic charges. I brushed my thumb along the edge of the paper, thinking about all the nights I stayed awake trying to decide if skipping a meal could stretch my prescriptions by another week. I kept insisting it was temporary math. I never realized my parents were running their own calculations with money meant to keep me upright. I grabbed my phone. No notifications, no missed calls, nothing from my parents wondering where I'd disappeared to. As usual, I opened my banking app. My balance stared back. Small, familiar, brutally honest. I scrolled through the last year. Nothing out of place. No mysterious deposits. Definitely nothing like the disability payments Grandpa insisted existed. My heart didn't race. Instead, a cold, steady clarity settled in. The kind that makes everything feel still and razor sharp. I drafted an email to the benefits office, my fingers moving without pause. Hello, I'm requesting a complete record of all disability payments issued under my name. Please verify every address associated with my file. Thank you. No theatrics, no backstory. Just a question that should have been mine to ask a decade ago. When I stepped back into the dining room, I didn't sit down. I stayed near the doorway, watching. Grandpa remained at the far end of the table, arms folded. The auditor, Stevens, as I'd soon learn, was still standing, his folder unopened. My parents acted as though nothing unusual was happening. Emma kept scrolling on her phone. I could have confronted them. Asked why they took money that wasn't theirs, why they let me struggle while they renovated kitchens and sent Emma on vacations, why they told relatives I refused to help myself. But confrontation was their dialect, not mine. Silence had always been my way of staying alive. Now it could be the framework of my power. I grabbed my coat from the back of my chair and slid it on. Grandpa noticed. His eyes softened just a fraction, but he didn't say anything. No words were necessary. He already understood that I wasn't leaving out of fear. I was leaving to create something. Outside, the air was sharp, thin enough to scratch my throat. I walked to the end of the driveway, gravel crunching beneath my shoes. Streetlights stretched along the road like decades passed in quiet witness. I stopped under one and pulled out my bag, fishing out the small stack of receipts. Years of surviving, not a single cent supplemented by the payments I had apparently received. The wind tugged at the edges of the paper. I gripped them tighter. Later that night, back in my Seattle apartment, the hallway light flickered as it always did. I didn't bother turning it off. I spread everything across the floor. Receipts, medical bills, letters, my notebook, and sat cross-legged, letting the hum of the refrigerator fill the silence. Then I started sorting, organizing, cross-referencing. I didn't need to understand why my parents acted as they did. All that mattered were the facts. Facts didn't bend. Facts didn't lie. Facts didn't play favorites. I opened a spreadsheet on my laptop, entering numbers, dates, diagnoses. I added a column for the disability support I should have received. When I calculated the approximate monthly total over 10 years, I felt nothing. No anger, no shock. Just the steady weight of truth settling into place. Hour by hour, the spreadsheet expanded. A quiet blueprint, a map of a life endured without the support meant for me. Around midnight, my email pinged. The benefits office had acknowledged my request. I stared at the screen, then at the scattered papers around me. I exhaled slowly. To the empty room, I whispered, I won't fix what they've broken. The next day, when I returned to my parents' house, the driveway was already crowded. Cars lined the street as if hosting a celebration, not waiting for a reckoning. I lingered at the edge of the walkway, letting the winter air settle over me. My breath rose in thin white strands before fading. That felt appropriate. Inside, the dining room looked unchanged from the night before. Same warm glow, same long table, same seating. Linda and Mark occupied the center as though they were presiding over something grand. My younger sister Emma sat beside Mom, chin resting on her hand, absorbed in her phone. Grandpa remained at the far end, posture rigid, eyes alert. Behind him stood the man he'd brought, the auditor, Stevens, folder still closed. No one acknowledged my arrival, nothing unusual. Stevens offered a subtle nod. Grandpa's jaw tightened, a silent signal that today would be different. Let's get this done, he said, his voice steady and formal, stripped of the warmth he normally carried. It wasn't anger. It was the kind of authority I hadn't seen him exercise in years. Mom shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Dad, can we not do this right now? Iris's clearly, he raised a hand, and she fell silent. This isn't about Iris, he said firmly. This is about what was taken from her. Mark cleared his throat, forcing a calm tone. We didn't take anything. There's been some kind of misunderstanding. Stephen stepped forward. No greetings, no small talk. He opened the folder, the scrape of paper on paper sounding sharper than any accusation. Inside, the documents were meticulously organized by year. 10 years' worth. He laid the first sheet on the table. A column of monthly payments under my name at my parents' address. Another sheet followed, another year. Same pattern, same deposits, same signature, my mother's. Stephen tapped a line with the end of his pen. These payments were meant to cover Iris's medical care, he said. Every single deposit had been rerouted to this household instead of going to her residence. Mom's face went pale. Emma paused mid-scroll. Dad leaned back, arms crossed tight, bracing. We used that money for the family, he muttered. For vacations? Stephen asked softly. For the remodel? For the SUV you bought 5 years ago. Mom blinked rapidly. We had expenses and the school wasn't cheap. The air felt thick, oppressive. I didn't speak. And I didn't have to. Each figure on those pages shouted the truth louder than any words I could muster. Stephen laid the final sheet on the table, a 10-year summary of monthly deposits, totaling over $280,000. I watched my parents' expressions shift. First denial, then quick calculations, and finally a hollow, brittle look. The sort of face people make when they realize a story they've been telling themselves no longer belongs to them. Grandpa pushed back his chair. The scrape reverberated. He pointed at Linda and Mark. Anything to say? The question didn't demand an answer. It landed flat, cold, final. Mom's voice broke. We thought she didn't need it. She's always been so independent. You told everyone she was irresponsible. Grandpa interrupted. You let her go without medication. You let her work through pain so you could upgrade your kitchen. Dad's eyes flicked between me, fear and something like shame warring in them. We were going to tell you eventually. When Grandpa asked, he whispered. After another 10 years, the room fell silent. The kind of silence that doesn't ease tension. It makes it tighter. I stood there, hands loosely clasped in front of me, my canvas bag hanging by my side. A strange lightness ran through me. Not victorious, not vindicated, just present. Here, finally, in a moment unshaped by anyone else's story, Stephen snapped the folder shut. The accounts tied to these deposits would be frozen pending investigation. Iris would be contacted directly about restitution. Mom's breath caught. A short, sharp hitch. Dad's shoulders slumped. Grandpa turned toward me. You don't have to stay, he said. You don't owe them anything. I nodded once. Not for him, for myself. I retrieved my coat from the back of my abandoned chair. The fabric felt cool and familiar. I slipped it on, adjusting the collar gently. No farewells, no last words. Just the soft scrape of my shoes against the floor as I walked away. Behind me, the silence cracked. Not with anger or shouting, just with the quiet realization that truth had already taken its side. Grandpa drove without a word, hands steady on the wheel, the road stretching ahead in dark, endless lines. Streetlights skimmed across the windshield, fracturing my reflection into shards. I watched each fragment slide past and vanish, like shedding something I'd carried far too long. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't fill the car with apologies or outrage. He let the quiet settle, the kind of quiet that asks nothing of you. Unfamiliar, almost tender in its simplicity. When he stopped outside my apartment, he left the engine running. They won't touch another cent, he said. Not a single one. His voice wasn't angry. It was definitive. I nodded, fingers brushing the canvas strap of my bag. Inside was the folder Stevens had handed me before we left. Copies of everything. My name printed where it belonged. My address absent from every line. Proof of how easily I had been erased. I stepped out and moved toward the front door. The hallway light flickered overhead, as it always did. But tonight, the flicker didn't bother me. It felt real, imperfect, but mine. Inside my apartment, I placed the folder on the counter. The papers fanned slightly at the edges, catching the soft hum of the refrigerator. I thought of the kitchen where I'd grown up. Polished appliances, bright lights, the hidden bottle of medication in my bag. I breathed slowly, letting the memory drift uncut. This time, the silence didn't press against me. It felt like air. Finally, there was space to breathe. I left the folder on the table overnight, untouched. Its weight steady, edges crisp in the morning light. Nothing in it demanded forgiveness or forgetting. It simply asked that I see things as they truly were. Boundaries aren't loud. They live in the quiet spaces where you stop letting others write your story. If you've ever stepped away from a version of yourself that someone else created, let this remind you. You are allowed to claim your truth and move toward a life that finally fits.